we should crack on. We should crack on. Are you ready to crack on, ladies and gentlemen? You're such a brilliant audience. I'm like, I'm just going to be me all night. I'm not introducing anyone. No, right, ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for your second act of your second section? Would you please welcome to the stage from the University of Manchester, Alex Hall!
Thank you. My name is Alex Hall, and tonight my set for you is simply titled Blame It on the Weatherman. Hence the lovely open music from Ireland's answer to the Spice Girls, Bewitched. For those of you not familiar with their canon of work, their name is spelt B***witched. That will help you when you're trying to Google it later. Don't ask me why. It was the 90s. There was a lot of punctuation in band names. Anyway, enough of underrated musical genius. They say that the British are obsessed with the weather. Well, I'm about as postmodern a Brit as you can find without channeling the spirit of Gertrude Stein. Because I'm not obsessed with the weather. No, I'm obsessed... Pardon me. Something's still playing in my pocket. There we go. I'll start that again. I'm about a postmodern Brit as you can find without channeling the spirit of Gertrude Stein, because I'm not obsessed with the weather. No, I am obsessed with people who are obsessed with the weather. And in a recent turn of events which threatens to unravel the very fabric of my psyche, I have begun studying people who are obsessed with people who are obsessed with the weather. And in a recent turn of events which threatens to unravel the very fabric of my psyche, I've started studying people who are obsessed with people who are obsessed with people who are obsessed with the weather. Anyway, ever since humans decided to shit behind closed doors and call it progress, we've had experts who claim to know whether rain or snow is on its way. Or sleet, for that matter. Or, as I prefer to call it, snane. Despite the first serious meteorological book being written in the 3rd century BC by Plato's homeboy Aristotle, big up, it wasn't until the 20th century that meteorology, with a little help from our friend the electronic computer, really started becoming less of an art pretending to be a science, and more of a science stood in front of a high school art drawing of the British Isles. And it's when the art became a science that the blame so jokingly cast at people in ye olde times started to get really serious. Now, I'm sure the Aztec high priest who killed himself because he failed to bring the rains that year would have been appalled at the treatment that Michael Fish received in 1987. For those of you not from the UK and not familiar with Michael Fish's infamous forecast from 1987, October on a BBC television forecast of that year, Michael Fish related a call that the Met Office had received where a woman had rang in and was worried about a hurricane on its way. Michael Fish rather patronisingly reassured her that there was no such thing on its way. Unfortunately, there was a storm coming from the other direction, and the next morning the UK woke to chaos. The south of England was devastated. 15 million trees were flattened. Yeah, that's 1, 5 and 6 zeros. And the worst storm since 1703 had hit the islands. Michael Fish's case has become quite famous. It was actually featured in the opening ceremony of the Olympics last year. On Wikipedia, it has its own page, and apparently it is now what is called a British cultural meme, or meme. I'm never sure on that word. I think it's got something to do with cats wearing hats on YouTube. Although his is quite a famous faux pas, The archives are actually littered with cases of meteorologists getting the forecast spectacularly wrong, and also the public, rather being a little too trusting of their certified weather shaman. One of my favourite examples comes from 1954, and it's Lord Norfolk is writing to the London Evening Standard, I believe it was, and Lord Norfolk, in the way only a member of the landed gentry could, berated the soothsayers of the Meteorological Office and their TV accomplice hacks at the BBC. Their error? They predicted rain the previous afternoon and none came. The consequence? Lord Norfolk's charity cricket match, only a handful of people turned up, and he'd predicted that 20,000 people were going to come. But it's not always the meteorologists it's not always the public, who get stung by the wrong forecast. Sometimes the meteorologists themselves are bitten on the ass. In early 1963, in one of the coldest winters to hit these usually soggy and mild islands, a group of meteorologists were stranded at a remote weather station up a mountain. They failed to forecast that a blizzard was on its way, and rather embarrassingly was stuck there for 4 days until the army could save them. Criticism and blame has dogged meteorology perhaps more than most scientific disciplines. The Meteorological Office, now known as the Met Office for short, the National Weather Service of the UK are no exception to this. One of the most spectacular and perhaps bitchy cases erupted early in their founding. They were founded in 1854, and originally the Met Office were founded to issue warnings for salty sea dogs, yar, and so that these mariners would know whether it was safe to leave the harbour or whether they should just stay in the pub and have another rum. They were founded by their founding director, which was Admiral Robert Fitzroy. Some of you may be more familiar with Fitzroy for his previous role as the captain of Charlie Darwin's holiday yacht, the Beagle. Now, several years after Fitzroy had founded the Met Office, he decided that just issuing gale warnings wasn't enough, and he added what he termed weather forecasts to his rostra, and he issued these to newspapers, and I use the quotation marks because it was Fitzroy who actually came up with the name weather forecast. I mean, the two words existed already, but it was him who put them together. The problem with calling them weather forecasts is they probably should have been named guesses that I just made about the weather. And this fact didn't go unnoticed, and Fitzroy was questioned in Parliament and by the bigwigs at the Royal Society. And it was decided that an investigation was needed, because in Britain we love a committee, we love an investigation. And so an investigation was convened. At its lead, anthropologist, tropical explorer, statistician, psychometrician, proto-geneticist, dog walker, and my favourite, eugenicist, Francis Galton. Now, at this point, Fitzroy, not so affectionately known by his colleagues, including Charles Darwin on the Beagle as hot coffee, should have realised that the proverbial shit was about to hit the fan. Galton, much like every third posh person in England at the time, was a cousin of Charles Darwin. And Charlie D thought that Fitzroy was a slave-sympathising, unscientific chancer who had basically pecked his head the whole time they were aboard the Beagle. Now, if that wasn't enough that Galton and Charlie D were tight, Galton himself happened to be the leading expert on proper meteorology of the age, and he considered that Fitzroy's methods for his newspaper weather forecasts were wholly unscientific. Actually, there wasn't a huge amount of difference in their approaches and techniques, so I prefer to believe that Galton probably had a little bit of a suppressed man crush on the hot-headed Fitzroy. In an ironic twist, it was actually Galton had been mouthing off a few years earlier about the fact that the Royal Society were going to start publishing weather charts, And it was in response to that that Fitzroy started doing his public forecasts. So I found that kind of funny, this kind of bitchy undertone that they had going on through this whole thing. Anyway, Galton published his report. It was basically a full-blown character assassination on Fitzroy and the Met Office as a whole as well. He claimed that his methods, whilst popular, and they were popular, his main forecast was in the Times, it was very popular. He claimed that whilst they were popular to the uneducated man, there was no evidence of their veracity or their utility. I.e., they didn't use Galton's method. Galton attempted, as I said, full-blown character assassination. He dragged up not only Fitzroy's work, but also his private life. Fitzroy lost his post at the head of the Met Office. Gale warnings were temporarily suspended, and all newspaper forecasts were outright banished. Fitzroy took this in the way that any well-respecting seafaring salty dog would, and he went into a spiral of depression. He started drinking, he went into a lot of ill health, he spent a lot of his money, he was destitute. There was probably some women along the way, although there is no archival evidence for that. And finally, it ended in suicide at the blade of his own cutthroat razor. Yes, that was the reaction his daughter had as well. It was over 100 years ago, come on guys. Okay, and so, of course, Galton was lauded and in time was knighted and went on to be celebrated by all Whiggish historians of science and some non-Whiggish. Yes, exactly. And you might think, Fitzroy's had a rough ride. It took a lot longer for Fitzroy's reputation, especially with the Met Office work, to recover. But I like to think that in this little duel, Fitzroy actually got the last laugh, because his vision of a prediction of the weather for every Tom, Dick and Harry is now a reality. He might not have had the scientific nous to do it in his own time, but today, his vision is there. And sometimes it takes a dreamer like Fitzroy to push our stubborn species forward. So I'd like to finish with a little raising of the glasses to the original weather forecaster, Admiral Robert Fitzroy. Thank you.